All right, just in case you were wondering, Herb Vasiliev and Peter Skudra from the same hometown, so that's how they know each other. From a foreign goaltender to a local goaltender, Cesare Maniago, you know, a local boy from Trail who started out there. He would catch the attention of Conn Smythe and later move out to Toronto. And after that, it was all go. So here now is the first part of our goaltender series on Cesare Maniago.
Well, I started my hockey there as a youngster with a lot of the kids in the neighborhood. Naturally, you know, we all played road hockey in those days, and listening to NHL on radio of the original 6 teams, we all idolized certain players, and for years we played a lot of road hockey. And then until we were old enough, we joined the local hockey associations and played my Pee-wee, Bantam, and Midget and Juvenile in Trail before leaving and going back east to play with Toronto St. Mike's and Junior. Most of the fellas that played on the 1939 championship team, they ended up residing in Trail, and they were people that we really idolized, and they at the same time took a fondness towards us as we were playing the game. And even to this day, I bump into some immigrants from Czechoslovakia, and I'll bring up the name Mike Buckna to them. And they did literally still worship the fellow over there as being the father of hockey in Czechoslovakia. And yet, when he was in Trail, he got active with us kids in minor hockey, even playing road hockey. He'd come out and stick handle with us. The Johnny Cronies were there then. And these were names that made Trail the champion of a city that it is. And my dad came home and he said, my God, he says, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I've got an appointment with Mr. McIntyre. And he literally was afraid that he had been fired or somewhat. He had done something wrong. So he went and met with him. Mr. McIntyre told him that, you know, he had a likeness towards me and was wondering on what my future plans were. And my dad at that time didn't know what I had planned. So he came home and asked, and I said, yeah, you know, I'd really like to go to St. Mike's, where you had the opportunity of still continuing with school and playing junior hockey. I think at that time, probably the best junior league in Canada. And it was done within a week. He had phoned Mr. Smythe up. Scholarship was arranged with St. Mike's, and lo and behold, I ended up going down there the very next year. Started off playing with the Spokane Comets in the Western Hockey League, and played a good portion of the year there. Then I ended up, Johnny Bauer had gotten hurt near the end of the year, and they called me back to Toronto. Jerry McNamara was the next in line to fill for Johnny Bauer. He in his first game also got hurt. So I ended up being the only goalie in the Leaf organization available, and what had happened is, ironically, I was playing for the Leafs and also for the Sudbury Wolves, where McNamara was playing. And I believe that this record still stands in that I did play 7 games within 6.5 days. I was just flying back and forth from Toronto and Sudbury, and it just happened that the schedule was in such a way that every day off the other team was playing. And so I ended up in Toronto, made the playoffs, played the first 2 games in the playoffs before Johnny Bauer came back, and then I went back to Spokane. So that was my brief stay with Toronto. What would happen if we happened to play in Toronto the night before, and then the next game was in Sudbury? Then I would fly up to Sudbury. Then after the Sudbury game, there happened to be a midnight train out of Sudbury back to Toronto. So I would catch the midnight train, get in Toronto at around 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and they had a hotel room for me there that I stayed at, and be prepared to play the next game with Toronto. So that went on for a full week. this was Punch Hemlock's belief that he wanted to bring in a few younger players every year, but to have his strong point on being experienced older players. And I'll never forget, the first game was probably the highlight of my career, in that I was so nervous, I didn't know what to expect. And you know, all the guys are there rooting for you, and we did happen to beat Detroit that first game 2-1, and then being named the first star. So like I say, in my mind, that was probably the top highlight of my career in hockey. Johnny was phenomenal. You know, as you say, when I got there, no one really knew Johnny's age, and I'd swear that he had to be at least 35 at that particular time. And he must have played maybe another at least 10 years after that. But I've never forgotten, in the 7 games that I played there, he ended up winning the Vezina Trophy, and in those days they were awarded $1,000. And sure enough, during the summertime, I received a check for $100 with a little note, "Thanks, Caesar, for helping me win the Vezina Trophy." So I've never forgotten John for that. And you know, when I bump into him periodically, I says, "John," I says, "that $100 has gone a long way."
Incredible storyteller, isn't he? We'll have a lot more with Cesare Maniago in the first and second intermissions as we go the second and third part of that feature. We follow his career through Montreal, Minnesota, and then finally to Vancouver. Thanks, John. It's a segue. I hate to do it, but from one old goaltender to another. In part 2, the Cesare Maniago story. In part 1, we saw his beginnings from Trail to St. Mike's and Sudbury and then Toronto. Now in part 2, he moves to Montreal, where he strikes up another relationship with another Hall of Fame goaltender in Jacques Plante.
In those particular days, they protected only so many players, and everyone else was available to go to anyone else if they so choose. And Montreal chose me, and I ended up going into the Montreal chain. Ended up playing the next year, started with Spokane, and wasn't there 2 weeks before Jacques Plante, who was the goalie at Montreal, he started having the asthma attacks. And so they called me back east, and I ended up staying in Montreal the full year, playing in approximately, I think, 15 to 17 games. And most of those games was filling in for Jacques if he came up with an attack at the first period, second period, or whenever. A real uneasy feeling to go through a season like that, but that was my role at that particular time, and I did the best that I could under the circumstances. As most of the players would say, he had a mind of his own, and I know when we were playing in Toronto, he felt that the hotel that we stayed at, the Royal York, just had too many dust particles within the hotel itself. So Toe Blake, who's the coach at the time, had asked that if I would room with Jacques, that we would stay up at the Westbury Hotel, which was a newer hotel closer to the Gardens. And so he was my roommate on the road. He had different ideas on how to approach the game and how he would associate with his teammates. And he was different in a lot of ways. Depending on who the team was coming in, you had a feeling if it was a real strong team, and he felt that maybe he wasn't capable of being up to snuff, then my seat was right behind Mr. Selke, which was right behind the Montreal goal. And I wouldn't budge from that seat even in between periods. And what would happen is Kenny Reardon was the assistant general manager at the time, and he would come out from the corridor, and all he would do is he'd look at me and he'd wave at me and he'd kind of say, "Okay, come on, it's ready for you to go in." And this could be at the end of the first period or at the end of the second period. Periodically, there were times where I would play the whole game, but there weren't too many of those. No doubt about it, he was one of hockey's best goalies. I can remember my first year there, he had just started wearing the mask, and he was getting a bit of aggravation from Toe Blake at the time. But he confided in me in that he was trying to get support from another goalie that might be there, and he asked if I wanted a mask made. And I said, sure, yeah, I'd like to have one. So we made an appointment, and we went up to the Montreal General Hospital at the time, and they made the molds there. And about a week later, my mask was delivered to the Forum, and I put it on for practice. And while we were skating around and I was waiting for my shots, Toe Blake skated up to me and basically said, he says, "What's that you have on?" I said, "Well, it's the mask." And he says, "Well, what are you intending to do with it?" I said, "Well, I was going to wear it in practice." He literally told me, he says, "If I were you," he says, "I'd think twice about it." Off came the mask. In those days, they always wanted for the players to have the macho aspect, and they, as far as say goalies or even forwards and defensemen wearing helmets, they felt that they didn't want the identity of the player to be lost for the fans, and for some particular reason, they just disliked players that wanted to protect their head, and it was a sad situation at that time. I mean, I just look at the injuries that I've had myself. I've had over 400 stitches in my face alone, and I've lost a few teeth, and I've had a broken cheekbone and such, to the point where I started wearing it, and then I could remember getting more shots against my mask, and I'd swear that if I didn't have it on, I'd be 6 feet under.
Time now for part 3 of our Cesare Maniago feature. In the first 2 parts you saw he had 2 stints with 2 of the most storied franchises in hockey. Well, then Cesar decided to go a new direction, expansion, first with Minnesota and then finally a trip home to Vancouver.
The first year of expansion, we were all borderline type players that came together in Minnesota. And the camaraderie there was probably the best that I've ever seen it of all the years that I had played in hockey, in that we went everywhere as a team. There were 20 of us after the games. We would go to one place together. We would have our wives together after home games at home, and it was a great feeling to have that type of closeness amongst each other. And we were successful there for the first few years, and when you have success, the years, they just fly by. I was with Gump for a short period in Montreal before being traded to New York. But then met Gumper again where he became our other goalie in Minnesota. And Gump and I were great friends in Minnesota. We were there for a few years, roomed together. We waited on each other we knew each other that if we were to play, that the other would get up early, get the coffee and maybe a little breakfast, bring it up to the room for the other. So we treated each other with royalty come game time, and really enjoyed my play with Gump. Gump was up with age. He was 10 years older than I was, and there are some days where he just didn't feel up to it. And so I told Gump, I says, listen, I says, if you're scheduled to play tonight and you're not up to it, just let me know. And you can go talk to our coach and just let him know that you're not up to it, but at least I can prepare myself for it. And at least he did that, and hey, I'd rather have it that way there than have everything wait as a surprise until 7:30 game time. It was exciting for us. My wife is also from Trail, and it was a difficult decision to make. I had a clause in my contract with Minnesota that if I was to be traded, that I would have to give the okay to the final team that I went to. And so there was a few choices where I could have gone to, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Toronto, and Vancouver. And my wife and I had a good talk about it, and we thought, well, why not? It was at the twilight of my career, and no better time than to go back home to be with friends and family. So we chose Vancouver and never did regret it. Actually, not too many goalies like to play against Bobby Hull or Stan Mikita, but primarily Bobby Hull, and especially when they came out with the curved sticks. Now, you know, when he first came out with it, he didn't know where it was going himself, and I could remember just coming out of my net to kind of cut off the angle, and you tell yourself, oh, please God, you know, as you saw him winding up, don't hit me, because you literally felt everything. It just made you black and blue. So it's either going to miss you and ding the post to go out or go in, and it could be over your head, it could be wherever. And I can remember an instance in Minnesota where he started shooting from everywhere, and this was an impossible angle that he shot one. It was the extreme board side along the goal line. He fired one that was coming for my head. I ducked, it glanced off my head, went in the stands, hit this poor gal between the eyes, broke her nose. And you know, I went to visit her the next day, and she was just happy that I visited her, and she got the puck that Bobby Hull shot. There is a lot of tough players. You know, in the first year of expansion, you dreaded going into Boston. That's when they had their strong team. Then Montreal the same way. And you always felt that it was a moral victory if you kept them to under 3 goals, because Boston at the time with Esposito, Hodge, Cashman, Bobby Orr, Freddie Stanfield, Johnny Busick on the point, their power play was just devastating in a small arena like Boston. So those are the teams that you feared the most, as far, not fearful of being hurt, but fearful of them running up the score on you. My very first game in the NHL, playing with Toronto, we ended up beating Detroit and ending up being named the first star of the game. That to me was one of the top highlights. Another was having my 3rd successive shutout in the first year with Minnesota. And I can remember Ray Cullen, he and I were the closest of friends at the time. And I'm going into the 3rd game, and I've already had 2 in a row. And he says, you know, he says, I'm amazed. He says, you make it look so easy out there. He says, Cesar, he says, what's going through your mind? I says, Cully, you know what? I says, it just seems that the puck right now is a floating watermelon that's coming towards me. It just seems that nobody can score on me. He says, you know, that's an amazing analogy on putting in perspective on how the shots are coming at you. And really, that was the feeling that I had.